In this interview, we dive deep into what might be Hamilton Morris' darkest research story: the pursuit of tellurium containing psychedelics. Horribly smelling, toxic, and until now unknown compounds. Hamilton is one of the most fascinating people and deepest thinker I've ever had the privilege of meeting. I followed and have been deeply inspired by his work for years. That's why it was a great honor that he invited me to participate in his research. This particular project pushed him to the edge, and others involved gave up entirely. Despite the despair and hopelessness it contained, being part of it was one of the most interesting and intense adventures of my life. So enjoy the story of tellurated psychedelics.
We've done it.
Yes,
Setting up a...
we are incredibly successful. We've got a bucket full of tellurated compound now, which we're going to pharmacological studies right now.
I mean, I don't know. Yeah, well, we're not there yet, but we're not necessarily that far off.
We might be one synthetic step and one attempt away from success.
Having real isolable material.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, now let's wind back all the way to the beginning of all that stuff. So we are talking about tellurated psychedelics, which is something I guess most people don't usually think about in their everyday lives.
No.
So what's like the origin story of that? Where did the first impulse come from? Where did that idea first get born?
The idea is very much Shulgin inspired, to the extent that he even explicitly mentioned the possibility of synthesizing 2-CTE in Pikal. So there is a reference to it. He suggests making it from dimethyl ditelluride, which he says is commercially available. Maybe it was then. I'm not so sure it is now. And if it is available, I don't think that would be the best way to do it. It might work.
Well, I mean, I guess you've had some experience with the corresponding selenium compound.
I tried, because that's how he made 2-CSE. It was with dimethyl diselenide. And that is commercially available. It's very expensive. And it is truly terrible smelling. Like, probably the worst smelling chemical I've ever encountered. And the selenium substituted benzene compounds are very volatile. They create a terrible Brazil nut type stench that has a tendency to waft into adjacent rooms, adjacent floors. Like, it really is like a terrible, terrible, terrible smelling thing. And the tellurium is rumored to smell worse, but it certainly doesn't. It doesn't smell worse, at least in terms of the acute effect of working with the compounds. There's some question about the persistence after you're exposed, whereas the selenium compounds smell terrible, but you can just wash them away with acetone and they're gone. The tellurium compounds are sneaky and have a way of depositing in microscopic quantities on various surfaces. I have one lens that smells like tellurium and may always smell like tellurium. The camera smelled like tellurium. Not strongly, but anytime I handled it, it would transfer a small amount of one of these tellurated benzene products onto my hands, and yeah.
I mean, I don't even find the smell of the tellurium to be so characteristic. I mean, like just smelling like burnt kind of stuff, like stuff that contains like phosphine, could remind me of a similar smell. I mean, with the sulfur, you really have that evil malodor type of smell, but it's not quite the same thing with the tellurium. I find it quite a bit more friendly in comparison.
It smells so weird that way, where there are some smells that are not necessarily terrible, but their persistence makes them terrible. Like, I don't know if you've ever done a Diels-Alder reaction with cyclopentadiene.
I have played with cyclopentadiene in the past, yes.
Yeah, I
Yes,
feel like that's
yes.
another example of something that has a very persistent smell that tends to get on you, and then it's certainly not the worst smell ever, but it hangs around, and for that reason is sort of dreadful, because it becomes like the olfactory version of tinnitus, where there's this persistent background smell where it's not deafening, but you can't escape it, and it starts to drive you insane.
Okay, that was a slight bit of a tangent on the smell of tellurium compounds, even though very fascinating. That was your phone.
I think it's fine. I think it's still recording. Yeah.
Very good. Okay, back to the idea of origin. So you said it was, or the origin of the idea, let's put it that way. You said it was very much Shulgin inspired, so how do I need to think about this? You were basically reading Picard and saying, this could be like an interesting route to explore that has hardly been explored, or what was the thought process behind actually coming to starting this project?
In medicinal chemistry, it's always very attractive when you have a single point on a molecule that is amenable to diverse types of modification. And you encounter this with cannabinoids, you encounter this with psychedelics, maybe you encounter this with everything. And so the 4 position on phenethylamines is really interesting because it tolerates an incredibly diverse array of substituents. And even the ones that aren't interesting from a 2A agonist perspective often have different types of interesting activity. Like there was a recent paper by Brian Roth with a NN dimethylamine substituent in the 4 position. So it was like the aniline phenethylamine, and that was a arrestin biased 2A agonist, which was interesting. It was
Whatever that means.
well, this is like one of the pathways that's thought to be non-psychedelic in terms of ligand 2A interactions. You have a GQ pathway that's thought to be the psychedelic pathway, and an arrestin pathway that's thought to be a non-psychedelic pathway. So that would be an example of something that maybe if Shulgin had done a self-experiment with it, he would have said, this is just inactive, but even the inactive compounds sometimes have interesting pharmacology. But it's always especially nice when you have a series that you can test sequentially. So the halogens are an obvious example where you can make 2CF and it's seemingly effectively inactive. Maybe if you took a couple grams of it, it would have some sort of activity. And then you have 2CC and it's active and very much a psychedelic, and then you have 2CB and it's even more active and even more psychedelic, and then you have 2CI and it's even more active again and even more psychedelic. And you can, based on that, chart a trend, which is the larger, less electronegative atom in that position makes a better 5-HT2A agonist and a stronger psychedelic in humans. And that's electronically interesting, it's chemically interesting, and it's a beautiful example of how you can use medicinal chemistry to understand human psychopharmacology, or I guess all psychopharmacology is human, arguably. It's maybe debatable. But So you can do the same thing with the chalcogens as well. And you can make 2CO, and 2CO is inactive. It's actually kind of surprisingly inactive, which would be the like phenethylamine analog of TMA2. And then you can make 2CT with the sulfur, and it goes from being inactive to an active psychedelic.
Well, I mean, 2CO being inactive, I mean, it's just mescaline with a methoxy group shifted by one place, so it's not even active in mescaline-like doses.
No, and that's what's really interesting about it, is you would think that it would be, you would think because in the amphetamine, the 2,4,6, or rather the 2,4,5 substitution pattern is more potent than the 3,4,5.
Wow.
But with the phenethylamines, the 2,4,5, maybe for pharmacokinetic reasons, I actually can't remember, and I don't even know if this is known, is not active. So I think even several hundred milligrams of 2CO is inactive, but then if you replace that oxygen with a sulfur, you get 2CT, which is active, but it's low potency. You replace the sulfur with the selenium, you get 2CSE, and it is active, but it's not clear whether it is more or less potent than the sulfur. And so the trend becomes sort of blurry. You know that you go up from oxygen to sulfur. You don't really know what happens between sulfur and selenium. And
why is that?
well, one reason is because no one has done pharmacology comparing them. That no one has ever, until very recently, repeated any of the selenium chemistry and published it. So Shulgin himself never published the synthesis of 2C-SE outside of Peak Hall. It's not in any peer-reviewed scientific paper. And there's a chemist, Josh Hartzell, who's working with a CRO in the pharmaceutical company Cybin, and he made the trifluoromethyl analog of 2C-SE and tested that. And in that instance, the apparent potency on the basis of efficacy and binding and head twitch went down between sulfur and selenium, but again, they didn't look at the oxygen or the tellurium, so the trend is still not, the trend across the chalcogens is not mapped as well as I would like.
Okay, well, that's certainly a very strong motivation to explore that trend. But I mean, you would expect from observing the halogens that the heavier analogs are the more potent ones.
You would, yeah, and tellurium is extremely similar in size to iodine, and so it's, I wouldn't do this if I thought that there wasn't a chance that it was very much active, and I think I would be surprised if it couldn't be used to make an active compound, which is what we've been working on. And it's something I didn't even talk about, or it's something I felt conflicted about talking about for a long time because I was always concerned someone else would do it. Then I would try to do it myself and realize what a nightmare it was and think, okay, no one else is ever going to do this because it's just the worst, like most despair-inducing, horrendous chemistry. I mean, maybe working with, I don't know actually. I mean, I guess working with radioactive materials, or like if you're doing, you know, these people that do work with like polonium or something like that, that would conceivably, but I don't know if polonium smells.
Well, I don't think for polonium that matters. And I don't think there will ever be any polonium psychedelic, even if you find like the carfentanil of psychedelics, because as far as I know, it's just so insanely toxic that it's like nanogram levels or less can kill you. But don't quote me on that.
No, yeah, it's not appropriate.
Also, yeah, just the radioactivity alone. Okay, anyway, so, okay, now I understand your motivation. The chalcogens have not been very well mapped in terms of pharmacology, so now you have the obvious quest to like make these psychedelics based on these elements. And I guess the first thing I would personally worry about, knowing basically nothing about selenium or tellurium, is that I was always under the impression those are very, very toxic elements that nobody would want to purposefully ingest. So I guess that was one of the first things you looked into when doing this project. So
Yeah.
what are your like findings and conclusions from that?
Yeah, I think the toxicity of the selenium and the tellurium compounds is definitely a thing that is worthy of careful consideration. And selenium is, you know, something that's required in human biochemistry to some extent and is not intrinsically toxic, but too much of it causes a condition called selenosis. It's pretty terrible and it smells horrible itself. And when Shulgin was doing the self-experiments with 2C-SE, he, I think, was coming right up on the ceiling of what would be considered a serious risk for inducing selenosis if one were operating under the assumption that every selenium molecule would be liberated metabolically, which is unlikely, of course. But if you did those conversions, he was getting right up to where, for all I know, it could be worse, right? It could be that the organo-selenium metabolites are far worse than elemental selenium in terms of their toxicity, or whatever selenium salts are most closely associated with selenosis. But I think he found the appropriate level. But the issue is with tellurium, even though it doesn't necessarily cause a toxic condition like selenosis, it makes you smell extremely bad, seemingly, apparently, when you're exposed to large quantities of it. And and it's a very big, heavy element. So even in a somewhat complicated phenethylamine structure, it's probably going to represent at least a quarter of the total weight of the molecule. And in something like just plain old 2CTE, it would be quite a bit more than a quarter of the weight of the molecule. And so if you're ingesting 10 milligrams of the stuff, that is going to be at least 2.5 milligrams of potential tellurium being introduced into your body, which hypothetically would be, again, there's all this ambiguity about how it's metabolized. Maybe it remains attached to the ring, and maybe it's excreted unchanged, and maybe it doesn't contribute to any kind of tellurium toxicity. But if it does, then, you know, there's so much uncertainty in all of this, of course.
And also maybe we should take a tiny step back and first like explain why it's even important to do these toxicology considerations when trying to discover psychedelics.
Certainly, yeah.
Because the only way to like confirm the identity or activity of a psychedelic is to test it on yourself.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, in some instances, certain types of toxicity are very difficult to predict, or certain things might appear to be toxic and be completely benign. There's a million things that may or may not happen that are very difficult to predict. And so I think it's probably a good example to approach these things in such a way as to really assume that nothing is necessarily safe, but also maybe not to necessarily assume that things are toxic, but just to be extremely, extremely cautious. And, you know, even things that have been tried by many thousands of people, like 2CI, I don't know, maybe it does something unusual to your thyroid. I don't know. Like, most people don't use 2CI enough for things like that to ever even become apparent. Like, I would imagine in the minuscule minority of humans that have tried 2CI, the number of those people that have tried it twice is probably at most 10% of those, and the number of people that have tried it 3 times is probably 10% of those. And so the number of people that have tried 2CI more than, let's say, 10 times is probably less than like 300 people that have ever existed, maybe less than 100. So, and that's probably the type of ingestion that would be required if there even were some type of hypothetical thyroid effect due to the presence of the iodine atom or whatever. So that's the other thing, is there's a lot of latitude with psychedelics to introduce potentially weird things because people only use them once or twice usually.
So what is the main worry, what could go wrong when ingesting these chalcogen compounds?
Well, there's the kind of large umbrella of unknown, just totally unknown, where it could be anything. It could be block some ion channel that's necessary for electrical signaling in the heart, or it could be a DNA intercalator, or it could do any number of unexpected, unpredictable things. But the main predictable negative outcome would be malodor.
So that was also the main worry we had to deal with.
Yes.
While working on these.
And I feel like I should say, you've been just an amazing help in this, because this has been, Yitka and I have worked on this for many years, and it's very hard. I mean, I appreciate, I'm just obsessed with this type of stuff, so it's always very wonderful to work with somebody else who's willing to withstand the horrors of this. And you smelled a bottle of Tellurium, which is something I would never dare do.
Well, I mean, thank you for the kind words, and I mean, I've had great fun, and I also find this very interesting for the reasons you outlined, exploring the boundaries of the great unknown of psychedelic activities in the 6th row of the periodic table. And that's exactly what I want to go into next, these challenges. So when did you start working on this project?
I first attempted to make the substituted benzene, which already was a novel and remains a novel compound, the 1,4-dimethoxy 2-methyltelenol benzene, with Yitka in 2023. And right off the bat, it was clear that it was going to be very difficult, although I believed that the reaction worked the first time we ever tried it. So it was clearly foul-smelling, clearly difficult, but also encouraging, because the synthetic transformation that we were attempting worked, or appeared to work.
So what were the initial considerations when starting this project? What the target compounds that you want to make are going to be? How did you go about doing that, figuring that out?
I'm almost concerned about saying too much. Talking about all this stuff makes me like a tiny bit worried. I do have this worry that someone is just gonna, even saying that I'm worried that someone is just gonna do it worries me. I feel like I would be so annoyed, even though there are many things that I'm delighted when people do them, like this would annoy me. And I feel part of one reason that it's been so difficult is I'm always doing it under bad circumstances. So I feel like someone with the appropriate situation could maybe just bang this out very quickly, which is one reason that I'm a little cagey about it. But I've certainly talked about it a bit. The challenges, the question was the challenges?
the question was the general tactic for solving this issue. I mean, we can keep it very vague, just the general thought process.
Well, we're at a very nice time in history where the structure-activity relationship of phenethylamine molecules has been extensively mapped. There's always unknowns, but there are now many different phenethylamine structures that are known to exhibit psychedelic activity in humans at doses below 1 milligram. And so the question there is, of these known structures, which one is the best contender for the introduction of a tellurium molecule so that you could get something that, assuming that it had sulfur type potency, might be active at a couple hundred micrograms to reduce the chance of tellurium poisoning in somebody that consumed it, even as a single one-off experiment. Obviously, I'm not getting into like chronic use.
Yes, of course. And well, I guess with this, I guess the main thing left to do now is to like briefly go through the history of this project and all the challenges you've encountered along the way. So this has been like structured into 3 phases, right?
There were the initial attempts in 2023 at a lab in Philly. Then there was a trip last year in 2024 to Spain where Yitka and I spent 2 weeks working with these 2 chemists at Kaikion Analytics, this lab in Spain, who actually I think maybe don't want their names mentioned. So I would mention them. They deserve credit, but I feel like they might not want their names mentioned, I guess.
I mean, we can ask them, and if they agree to, I can put it as a text note.
Okay. And they were very helpful, and so we were repeating the same attempt to make the 1,4-dimethoxy 2-methyltelenol benzene, but the methyl lithium that we had was like seriously degraded and full of this, I'm assuming, some kind of lithium carbonate or something, or lithium hydroxide, some kind of white lithium salt, or maybe it's lithium iodide, I don't know.
I just reacted with the ether to form the corresponding alkoxide and all that kind of stuff. I just eliminate lithium hydride, even though that's way less likely with methyl lithium. I mean, lots of stuff can go wrong with methyl lithium, and its shelf life is not too good.
Yeah, and it came this way as well, it seems. So these are, and it was going very badly. It was going very, very badly last time. It was going so badly that I wonder what was going wrong. I mean, maybe it was just bad methyl lithium. Some of the purification techniques that we were using are ones that I don't have experience with, like DCVC. So I was sort of trusting. Also, I pretty much never do distillations. I do them very occasionally, but I always have a bad feeling about distillations. There's certain compounds where they go well, and obviously people that have like a really good conditions for it, but I feel like anytime I'm doing a distillation, it's always something that is poorly rigged with the wrong pump, and there's always going to be, it's always a combination of problems. The heating mantle isn't right, the pump isn't right, the collecting flasks aren't right. There's always just something wrong, and so I always get a doomed feeling whenever something that I'm working on involves distillation. But at the same time, if you're working with these simple substituted benzene compounds on a somewhat large scale, distillation is the kind of logical purification technique. The idea of running like a 10-gram column on a substituted benzene seems a little bit extravagant and messy, so I don't know. But anyway, everything went terribly.
So the first attempt that was in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
And there you actually got a tellurated benzene compound?
It looks like it, yeah. It had the appropriate mass with all of the isotopic peaks on mass spec. Did NMR on it, which I showed you. It appears that there is a methyl tellurium ether, but again, even that compound was novel. There's no reference. I had an oil that smelled very strongly of tellurium and had the appropriate mass on mass spec and appeared to have a proton NMR that made sense. And there is tellurium NMR, there's all kinds of additional stuff that I could have done. But yeah.
And did you try to do anything else with that particular compound, or was that just the initial attempt as a proof of concept?
The initial compound I knew was impure, and so I didn't want to use that material to go directly into formulation, because that's basically what I'd done with the selenium compounds when I was trying to reproduce the Shulgin 2C-SE synthesis, which Shulgin himself did and describes in his synthesis of kind of working with these somewhat impure materials, and they smell so bad it's very easy to convince yourself to just saying, oh, at the next step they'll be less volatile, I'll purify them then. I'll just formulate now, do the Henry reaction, and at least then I can recrystallize more readily, or then it will be easier to do something, or I'll just wait until the reduction and then something. So, but of course this is terrible technique. You never want to, as tempting as it may be, and it's always very, very, very tempting to say, we'll purify later. You never want to do that, because there will always be new impurities, and you'll get this exponentially branching tree of impurities with each step that will make your life a nightmare.
Especially if you haven't done the synthesis or nobody else has done that synthesis before.
Right.
So, okay, so on the second attempt, basically you couldn't get the reaction working because of the bad methyl lithium, or was there anything else that was standing?
And we were just talking about this, and my confidence is beginning to erode in the original appraisal of the problems, but the feeling at the time was that photooxidation was the major hurdle, and that there was something analogous to a sulfoxide or a selenoxide elimination taking place, where you'd get photooxidation of the tellurium atom followed by elimination of the alkyl group. That's what I thought was happening. And I now feel less confident in that.
So the conclusion from the second part was that the photooxidation was maybe causing troubles, and now with the further experiments reconsidering the analysis that was done back then, might also be that, yeah, just other impurities could explain the analysis.
Yeah, I would want to look back, because, depending on how a mass spec is calibrated, sometimes you get a lot of these adducts that can create very confusing weights that are difficult to interpret. And so we almost went down exactly the same. So it appears as of today that we may have had success in one of these reactions, and I'm using the word success very loosely here, which is to say that there was a likely psychedelic tellurium containing compound that was a component of a mixture, maybe a third of a mixture that we have not isolated. So you can get away with that kind of thing in particle physics, but in organic chemistry, it's not. You can't really just say we detected it, but didn't. You kind of need to get it in a vial and label it and have the pure compound. But I actually think that given more time and I mean, I think we will do it. I think we did probably do it. And I think that the synthesis that we're testing is now a good plan. A lot has been learned. I'm being deliberately a little bit vague because I don't want to give away all of the tricks.
Of course.
And I don't even fully understand myself because this whole oxidation thing, I'm wondering if some of these apparent telluroxides and tellurones were actually just like potassium adducts or something like that. And then on top of that, we're typically using proton NMR, which is really bad for detecting these oxidized chalcogens on the basis of their electronic effect on an adjacent carbon atom. Like again, these are like totally uncharacterized compounds, so it's very hard to logically deduce exactly. I mean, maybe you could. I'm sure someone could. I'm sure there's like a guy in Brazil who's like the Tellurium master who would who would look at this and say like, obviously, don't you know about how readily tellurium forms potassium adducts or something, but, or whatever, or how readily or this is a characteristic shift of a tellurone or something.
Yeah, it's definitely a very multifaceted challenge, a lot to learn, a lot of stuff that can go wrong, did go wrong, will probably still go wrong with future attempts of doing this. So before we like end with the craziness of everything that has been going on this attempt, is there anything for the second attempt that was particularly noteworthy or crazy or spectacularly failed that you would like to mention before?
This attempt?
No, the one before that.
Oh, the one before that.
Before we come to this one.
Oh yeah, it was I feel like I have Tellurium PTSD. Like I do have a little bit of
Oh no.
a little bit. Yeah, because it's been so challenging, all this stuff. And because just working with the compounds has this added fear factor of like, you know, if it were just like a propyl group or something, I might just say, whatever, let's like recrystallize it. Let's just run a column on it and see what happens. Oh, let's like, we'll do a prep plate. Let's see what happens. But there's just this, every single thing working with it has this contamination risk and this fear of poisoning yourself or other people. And it's just yeah, it's too much. I think it's like driving people insane.
I guess this is a good transition to the craziness of what we've been experiencing now. So going all the way back to the start of this attempt that we are right now, this is the longest attempt at doing this.
This is the longest, three continuous weeks, working every waking moment, more or less, of every day. And
how's that making you feel?
It's making me feel really crazy. Like I feel a deep darkness in, not at this exact moment. Right now I don't, but definitely on at least every day I would feel at least a period of deep, unrelenting despair.
Tellurium-induced despair.
Serious. And your optimism and can-do attitude has, I think, kept me going, because I really, and that's, I think, like, this is maybe, I think, like an interesting thing to discuss that doesn't get talked about a lot is like, I remember reading this paper, I'm sure I could find it, but I don't remember exactly. It was in some, it was like in a forensic science journal, and it was, as I recall, giving a 1 to 10 rating on the difficulty of the clandestine synthesis of different drugs. So,
Wow.
so it was like making PCP is a 6, making LSD is a 7, making methamphetamine is a 3, or something like that. It had this sort of, and I remember thinking, wow, the scale is kind of arbitrary, or or can you really rate the difficulty of chemistry? It's kind of like when somebody says someone is a good or a bad chemist. It's like, what does that even mean? What is a good or a bad chemist? Is it the chemist who has the most scientific publications, or is it the person with the largest knowledge base, or the most resources, or they've memorized the most reaction mechanisms, or the best at analysis, or the best at convincing people to give them money to do experiments, or they're the most curious, or the most motivated, or the most willing to do things that no one else would do, or whatever, or have certain instincts, certain scientific instincts that are very good. And this is like one of the weird things about science, is you have some people that are hyper qualified and hyper suited to a certain task. Like, I've encountered people where if you were to look at everything about them, you'd say this is the best person in the world for this particular task. But when it came to actually accomplishing the task, different personality factors made them bad at it. Maybe they weren't good at motivating other people to help them, or they were too afraid of failure, so they took a more conservative route that was ultimately less fruitful, or maybe they were bad at something as simple as searching scientific and patent literature to make sure that nobody hadn't already done what they had done previously, or what they thought they were doing in the future, to make sure that it was truly original, right? All these small things would potentially be the difference between a good or a bad chemist, but no one ever thinks of that. Like, a good chemist is someone that does a thorough literature search so that they don't accidentally make mistakes or repeat failed experiments that other researchers have done in the past, or whatever. So that's what I've been thinking about a lot recently, is like, this is very, 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 very difficult chemistry, but I'm sure there's like a million domains that are far more difficult in various technical elements. We're not even really using the Schlank technique, although we did use this glove box for a lot of it. But it's like, you know, it's not that complicated, but for whatever reason, I feel that the spiritual elements of this have been very difficult. And both Yika and I have worked on this for so long, and some of the other people who we were working with, the ones who didn't want to be named, they definitely, I think, are like tapped out. I think they tapped, and I don't say that with a hint of to diminish them at all. They just are tapped out. I asked a couple of times, said things like, "Oh, do you think there's any chance you want to come in on the weekend and work on this?" And they just said, "No, 100% no," which is totally reasonable. Like, it is, they are the reasonable ones. It is reasonable to say no, yeah, I do not wish to come in on the weekend and bang my head against the wall trying to get a tellurium carbon bond to appear in exactly where I desire it to appear.
Yeah, I mean, the working hours on this have been crazy. I mean, we've been basically working on this project from like noon to midnight or longer, basically like every day, which is not the most healthy working schedule, I find, but that seems to be the type of stuff that is required if you want to like do novel research, and especially if the outer circumstances aren't exactly ideal for what you're trying to do.
And none of us live here, so we have to. Like, there's no time to not. There's no time to go home at 5 and do other stuff. It's just, and we did a lot. We made so many compounds and improved on literature techniques and maybe even reached the finish line kind of, but I want more. But I think we did.
We proved that we've made we have the analysis that we've made a compound that has most likely psychedelic activity, but the amounts could be a little bit improved.
They could be improved, yes. So, but yeah, so I think like this has definitely been an interesting confrontation with the, I do hate the word spiritual, because I don't mean,
it seems to have grown on you.
Yeah. Well, because I don't know what I don't know if there's a good materialist word for, maybe just psychological. Psychological, that's probably a better word. The psychological elements of all of this, like not purely intellectual, but the motivation, the stamina, the optimism, emotional fortitude, all these things play a huge, huge role. Like because it's very tempting to just not continue.
Very much so, especially if you feel like you don't know how to continue, or you feel like what I'm going to try next is most likely not going to work, which is not the most encouraging thing. And do you also want to talk a little bit about the additional challenges with one of your cameramans?
Yeah, in vague terms. I mean, because that's the other thing, is filming. Chemistry is difficult. Filming chemistry is definitely also really difficult, because, I mean, one of the cameras that we're filming on right now got pretty dunked in a very pigmented nitrostyrene that is not fully removed. I mean, I can see the residues on the lens right now as we speak. And so the technical dimensions of filming these things are very hard, and it almost comes back to the, like, what is a good, in the same way there's what is a good chemist, there's what is a good photographer, what is a good camera operator. And I was working with someone who was insanely good, who came and worked for free, this DP Sarah Penson, and it was, as I was watching her film, I was thinking about how difficult it is to even know what's going on, because it's like if I were being asked to film a card game that I've never heard of or something, and someone is like, film the good part of that, and then I didn't know the rules, I didn't know anything, so there's so much stuff that has never really been filmed. It's hard to film. It's like, do you really want to crane the camera over an opening bottle of triflic acid, or, you know, these little moments happen so quickly and are often so dangerous, and it just is, it's hard to film. And before this wonderful woman who came and so kindly filmed for 10 days with us, there was a previous person, pretty much, I mean, I'm tempted to say that just like the idea of doing this caused him to go insane after like an hour, but that was pretty much what happened. It was like an hour into this, he threw in the towel. I would say it was about 1 hour. And maybe it certainly crossed my mind that maybe he was right. Maybe he saw the horrors ahead. Um, but it made things very difficult because doing the chemistry and filming the chemistry is very hard. We had, the reason that we're working together now is we had worked together on this lysergamide chemistry project, and that was an absolute delight, and you showed yourself to be very, very good at all these strange things, the kind of documentary aspects, but also all of the synthesis. And so I am so glad that you agreed to join me for this, because this is just insane. And
I'm so glad that you invited me for this.
Yeah.
I'm having a great time and I'm learning so much.
Oh, good. Yeah, because this was, I don't know what's gonna, I think it's gonna be interesting. I'm afraid to talk about it, kind of, but I don't know, I feel like this is the impulse. Like, you don't necessarily, like, I could come up with a million basically fake reasons for why this needs to be done, and I've experimented with that, of like justifying on the basis of this or that bond, and like, oh, there's like this sigma hole and this charge that would be perfect for interacting with this residue, and this is why this needs to be done, or whatever. But I think that there's really something to be said for doing anything that's never been done before, no matter how ridiculous it is. And I don't know how you feel about this. This is another thought that I've been having, maybe a concluding thought, is like, I would be curious what you think about this, because this might be unfair. This might be
Please go for it.
Okay. I've been feeling like a sort of envy of of scientists of the past, because I feel like they had it easier. Like,
in what way easier?
Like brominating.
Now I know what you mean.
Brominate, but I don't want to be unfair, because the reality is all that stuff is only easy in retrospect. None of it is easy at the time. It's always innovative at the time, but it does seem like our generation of researchers is left with some very difficult tasks, that many of the easy things have been done, and the things that remain are insanely hard to do.
I mean, sure, the things become definitely much harder to do, but like you said, I mean, the comparison is not quite equal, because we have much better tools now. I mean, we have like a tabletop NMR to do like the analysis. We have, I mean, I guess back in the day when they were making 2CB, they also had that kind of stuff already, but then we have the development of AI, and which definitely also could help with doing stuff. But yes, I mean, I'm not quite so sure if I would agree with that there is like less to discover, because I think what there is to discover is basically infinite, or we couldn't like possibly imagine everything that there still is to discover compared to what hasn't been discovered yet. So from no matter how much you do research and explore, there will be not much taken away from the sea of the great unknown that surrounds us always. And I will also say, in this case, it is that you have very, I'm lacking the English word right now, but you put a lot of, you basically have very high standards. That's what I'm trying to say. You have very high standards for what you are trying to achieve. So that's what we were also discussing while we were trying to make these compounds. We also passed through compounds that haven't been explored before in humans. So exploring these as a target, we definitely could have done with the chemistry we did in these days. So, I mean, we did a lot of novel stuff, and so I don't think there's too much need for envy for the chemists in the past. I definitely think there's still way more to explore than you could ever hope to do in your lifetime.
There's a lot to explore, definitely.
And way more extremely interesting stuff, even with the substances that have already been made.
Absolutely. There's definitely a lot to explore. But I do have that feeling. Like, just one quick example would be, like, I don't know how this is maybe, whatever, all this is obscure. Like, the fly compounds are interesting, where you have the methoxy groups and the 2C compounds that are bound into this tricyclic ring system. And one of the ideas is that how the lone pair electrons on the oxygen are oriented is meaningful to the pharmacology of the compound, and that they need to be oriented in opposing directions. And one piece of support for that is the way that they're oriented in the more potent fly compounds. But to truly test that hypothesis, you'd want to orient them in the same direction. So you'd want to make the flies that are wrapping back into the 4 and 3 position. You see what I'm saying? So it would be like
basically swapping the position of the oxygen atom?
The oxygens would still be para to one another, but they would wrap around on the same side. So it would be like a 2CG. It would be like 3-4, both the 3 and 4 position would be occupied.
Okay.
So there would be, and those are way more difficult to make. Like, it's occurred to me where I think, oh, that would be interesting. Those might be active. And not only might they be active because they would have the 2CG type 3-4 dye substitution, they would be an interesting way to test this hypothesis. And until you've made those compounds, I don't feel like that hypothesis has been adequately tested. But the chemistry is crazy difficult. And I feel like that's always the feeling that I have, is like the thing that I want to make is going to be really tricky to make.
Well, I mean, that is true. You can make even more and more elaborate molecules, and they become more and more difficult to make. But going back to the examples of the molecules that have also been made, there's like a couple easy modifications you can make on any of them and get like a completely different compound. For example, like beta-methylphenethylamine, how many of these have been explored? How many of the amphetamines have been separated in the enantiomers, which should be relatively easy to do and explore. Or if you take like a compound that I personally find very interesting, like MMDA, I feel like, yes, it has been tried by a couple of people, but even though it has been tried by a couple of people, I still feel there's so much interesting stuff left to explore. Or like the 2C compound of that hasn't been like explored to active levels, even though I believe it could reach active levels if you go a little bit higher, because it's quite similar to mescaline and all that kind of stuff. So,
and the NVOME as well would be interesting. Yeah.
And a recent experiment I've told you about with the tryptophan, which was also a very, very simple experiment anybody could basically do, shows that there's a lot of unexplored stuff, or using these substances to induce different states of consciousness, like lucid dreaming, is basically completely unexplored. So there's so much stuff that would be really simple to do, or that basically anybody can do, that is still not explored. I feel like
Oh yeah. Yeah, there's a lot that's unexplored. No
I
question.
mean, there's a lot I definitely would like to personally explore and do, and feel like I can't do all of it that I would be interested in doing, because it's too much.
Yeah.
So it's not like I mean, I get what you mean. On the basis, of course, it gets more difficult to make more advanced molecules, but maybe some other relatively simple structure turns out to be psychedelic, which might be far more potent than lysergamides. And that could open up a whole new playing field and very simple synthesis pathways. Who knows?
Yeah. It's definitely possible. It's definitely.
Like the ultimate goal, the carfentanil of LSD, what Alex suggested. That would definitely be very cool to find that. But I mean, are there any reasonable approaches to do such a project? Or is that just wild guessing?
I mean, people will say AI, and I don't doubt that AI will be an approach, but the historical trajectory of these things has been just a very gradual, bit by bit modifications of these structures. It's really happened incrementally. LSD is the exception, not the rule. Everything else has been incremental. That's the only one where it just was spectacular out of nowhere, and all subsequent modification of it has done little to fundamentally alter its activity. All of the tryptamine and phenethylamine work has been extremely slow, with maybe one major new contribution to the structure activity understanding every decade.
Yeah, and I feel like we could keep talking about all of this forever, but I mean, we've been going for quite a while now. I don't even know how long.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for doing this interview with me. Thank you so much for inviting me to join you in this.
I can't thank you enough for everything you've done. I really, and Yika as well, who's working right now off camera. Both of you have been just such an amazing help. And I think we're gonna, even though I think we've already succeeded, I think we're gonna succeed.
We're gonna crush
a lot more.
We're gonna crush these Tellurium psychedelics. Thank you so much.
Of course.